She made the wrong call on a Tuesday in November. That is the part nobody tells you, that the decision that changes everything usually does not feel like a decision at all. It feels like the only option left. Her name was Delia Marsh. She was 23 years old, and she had been sleeping outside in Portland for 11 days when she found the porta-potty. She had copper red hair, not the kind that comes from a bottle, actual copper, the color of a new penny sitting in the sun. She kept it long, past her shoulders, usually tied back in a braid that had started coming loose somewhere around day 4 of being outside. She had a gap between her 2 front teeth that she had always been self-conscious about. She had a small scar on her left jawline from a car accident when she was 16. She was not tall, maybe 5'4", and she wore a green Army surplus jacket, 2 sizes too big for her, that she had bought at a Goodwill in Salem 3 months before any of this started. She carried everything she owned in a hiking backpack that had a broken left strap, so she carried it on one shoulder with her left hand gripping the bottom to keep it steady. This is what she looked like on the morning she saw the porta-potty. It was sitting alone in a gravel lot off Southeast Division. The lot was fenced on 3 sides. There was a construction project that had stopped. No workers, no machinery, no timeline posted anywhere. The porta-potty was green and gray, one of the older models, not the newer blue ones. It had a small plastic vent on top. It had been there long enough that the gravel around its base had settled flat. No footprints, no traffic. Someone had zip-tied a broken piece of orange safety fencing to the gate latch, but the gate itself was not locked. She stood at that gate for a while. She knew exactly what the porta-potty was. She knew what it smelled like, what it looked like inside, what people would say if they saw her go in there. She had seen other people use them in ways that had nothing to do with shelter, and she had told herself she would not do that. Not that. But it had been 28 degrees the night before, and the night before that. And she had been sleeping under a loading dock awning that a security guard had started checking at. 2 a.m. She pushed the gate open. She did not go inside right away. She walked the perimeter of the lot first. She looked at the fence, chain link about 6 feet, with the top rolled back rather than spiked, which meant she could climb it if she needed to leave fast. She looked at the 3 sides of construction fence that bordered the lot. You looked at the sight lines from the street. From Southeast Division, you could see the gate, but not the back of the lot. From the side street, you could not see the lot at all. The porta-potty itself was positioned toward the back corner, not visible from either street. She set her backpack down against the fence and opened it. She had 2 garbage bags, a roll of duct tape, the gray cloth kind, not the plastic stuff, a wool blanket that she had carried since she left her last place, a lighter, 3 granola bars, or a half-full water bottle, and a small folding knife with a wooden handle that her father had given her when she was 19. She laid everything out on the gravel and looked at it. Then she opened the porta-potty door. The smell hit her, and she stepped back. She had expected it. It was still worse than expected, but she stood there in the doorway and looked at it the way she had learned to look at things since November. Not at what it was, but at what it could become. It had 4 walls, a solid fiberglass floor, a roof, a door that latched from the inside, a small vent at the top, a seat with a lid, a small shelf on the left side, 36 inches wide roughly, 44 inches deep, about 7 feet tall. She pulled her bandana up over her nose and went in. The first thing she did was pull a piece of duct tape off the roll and press it over the ventilation gap at the bottom of the door, the gap that exists in most portable toilets so the door does not create an airtight seal. She pressed the tape slowly, working corner to corner, making sure it held against the plastic frame. Then she went around the base of the seat enclosure, the plastic molded unit that covers the tank below, and pressed tape along every seam she could find, not to seal the tank, to contain the vapor path. She had read once, in a magazine she found in a laundromat waiting room, that most of the odor from portable toilets does not come from the tank itself, but from the ventilation path, the gaps and seams that allow gases to circulate upward. The article was about construction site management. She had read it while waiting for a dryer cycle that cost $3, and she had not thought about it again until this morning, where she worked for 47 minutes on the ceiling. When she opened the door to step out and breathe, the smell inside had already dropped. Not gone. Different. More contained. She sat on the gravel with her back against the fence and ate a granola bar and thought about what she had just done. There is a gap between knowing something is possible and understanding that you're actually going to do it. She had crossed that gap sometime in the past hour. Without noticing, She was going to sleep in this porta-potty. She was going to make it work. The next problem was cold. The fiberglass walls of a portable toilet are not insulated. They absorb cold and release it in slow waves. She had experienced this in portable toilets at outdoor events, the way the walls feel when you brush against them on a cold day, like touching the inside of a refrigerator. To sleep in here, she needed the walls to stop doing that. She had 2 garbage bags. She filled the first one with air, the way you would fill a balloon if you were using your breath. Held it tight, twisted the end, taped it flat. She pressed it against the left wall and taped it at the corners. The air pocket created a barrier between the fiberglass and the interior. She did the same with the second bag on the right wall. 2 walls. Better than nothing. The back wall and the door she left as they were for now. She unrolled the wool blanket and draped it from the top of the door. There was a small hook there, the kind used to hang a hand sanitizer dispenser, and she looped a corner of the blanket over it so that it fell across the door in a panel, creating a second layer between herself and the coldest surface in the space. She had no heat source. She was not going to use one, not inside a sealed fiberglass enclosure, not with the ventilation partially taped. That was a line she was not going to cross. But a human body in a 36 by 44-inch sealed space generates more warmth than people realize. She knew this. She sat inside with the door latched and counted 10 minutes by her breathing, and the temperature inside was already different from the temperature outside the door. She stayed that first night. She slept in the seat enclosure, not in the seat itself, but on the lid, which she tested for weight and found solid enough, with the blanket pulled over her and her backpack wedged against the door as additional insulation. She slept in 4 stretches. She woke up at 2:17 a.m. By her phone, she had a phone, a cracked screen Android that she kept charged at the library, and the inside temperature felt warmer than any doorway she had been in. The outside temperature, she checked after, 26 degrees. Dawn, and walked to the library bathroom and cleaned up and ate the remaining granola bars. Then she walked back to the lot. The second day, she made the space better. She had found, on her walk, 2 things: a section of carpet remnant left out on a sidewalk, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, and a plastic storage tote, the kind that normally holds holiday decorations, left open and empty beside a recycling bin. She carried both back to the lot. The carpet remnant went on the floor. She cut it to fit using her folding knife, trimming it around the base of the seat enclosure so it covered the fiberglass floor entirely. Her cold comes from below as much as from the sides. The carpet created a thermal break between her feet and the floor. The storage tote was inverted and placed against the back wall. She sat on it when she needed to be off the floor. When she slept, she used it as a footrest, which let her recline slightly against the wall and the blanket panel rather than being fully upright or trying to fit herself entirely onto the seat lid. On the 3rd day, a group of guys walked through the lot. She heard them from inside, the gate scraping, voices, boots on gravel. She sat still with the door latched. One of them tried the porta-potty door. It did not open because the latch was engaged. He knocked twice. Nobody knocks on a porta-potty door and then waits. They either assume it is occupied and leave, or they knock again harder. He knocked once more, then moved on, or she heard them leave through the gate. Later that day, a woman named Tess found the lot. Tess was 26, had been in Portland since August, and had been staying on and off at a shelter on Burnside that had a 10 p.m. intake cutoff, which she missed more than she made because of a part-time night shift she was still holding at a grocery distribution warehouse. Tess and Delia had seen each other before, at the library, at a meal program on Wednesdays. They were not friends exactly. They knew each other the way people know each other when they are operating in the same narrow geography and need the same narrow set of resources. Tess came through the gate at around 3 p.m. and found Delia sitting on the gravel eating half a sandwich she had gotten at the meal program. Tess looked at the porta-potty. She looked at the duct tape on the seams. She looked at the carpet edge visible at the bottom of the door where it had bunched slightly when Delia came out. She said, "You're sleeping in there." Delia said yes. Tess stood there for a moment. She said the thing that people say. She said it was disgusting. She said she had no idea how Delia could do that. And then she asked how the ceiling worked. That was the thing about Tess. She had a practical mind. She could be horrified and curious at the same time, which is a specific kind of intelligence that not everyone has. She sat down on the gravel and listened while Delia explained the tape, the garbage bag air pockets, the blanket across the door, the carpet, the tote. Tess was quiet for a while after that. Then she said there was a second construction lot about 4 blocks away. She had walked past it 2 days ago. There were 2 porta-potties in it. Neither of them said what they were both already thinking. But 3 days later, when Tess had not made the shelter intake cutoff again, not because of the shift this time, but because the shelter had reached capacity, she came back to the lot and knocked on the door and asked Delia if she still had duct tape. She did. She had found another roll, partial, in a recycling bin outside a hardware store. They worked on Tess's porta-potty together. Delia showed her the seam taping in sequence. Door gap first, then base seams of the seat unit, then the vent at the top where the smell path was strongest. They found a piece of cardboard at the construction fence and cut it to fit the back wall, which gave another thermal layer that Delia had not had in hers. Tess had a Mylar emergency blanket in her bag, the thin, crinkly silver kind that folds down to nothing. They taped it to the inside of the door, reflective side inward, which bounced body heat back into the space. When Delia saw the Mylar on the door and felt the difference, she understood something she had not fully worked out before. The whole system depended on what you kept out as much as what you put in. Cold air, vapor path, wind at the door gap. Every point where the outside could get in was a point she could close. She went back to her own unit that evening and taped the door gap differently, using 2 parallel strips instead of 1, overlapping slightly, which created a more continuous seal across the uneven plastic edge of the door frame. She did not have Mylar. She did not have cardboard for the back wall yet, but she folded her garbage bags flat and taped them to the back wall in a double layer, which was not the same thing as Mylar but was something. She also did something she had not thought to do before, where she taped around the toilet paper holder mount on the left wall, a small gap where the bracket met the fiberglass that she had not noticed until she ran her hand slowly over the interior surfaces in the dark, checking for cold spots. It was a minor gap, but minor gaps in a small sealed space matter more than they would in a room. The temperature inside that night was the warmest it had been. She did not have a thermometer. She had no way to measure it precisely, but she knew by the way she slept. 4 hours straight, which she had not done outside in 2 weeks. By the end of the first week, there were 4 people using the lot: Delia, Tess, and 2 others. A man named Marcus, who was 24 and had been staying near the river, and a woman named Jo, who was 21 and had been couch surfing in a situation that had stopped being safe. None of them had been told about the lot by any organization or outreach worker. They had found it the way people find things in a city when they are paying close attention to what is around them, through proximity, through conversation, through the specific kind of attention that comes from needing to solve a problem. None of them laughed at each other. That part is worth saying directly. Inside that lot, no one laughed at what anyone was doing to survive. They talked about what worked and what did not. They shared what they had when they had extra. Marcus found a second piece of carpet remnant and gave it to Jo because she had nothing on her floor. Jo found a plastic bag full of hotel toiletries left outside a donation bin and divided them into 4 equal portions. Tess brought back coffee twice a week from the distribution warehouse. It was not technically allowed, but the supervisor who would have cared was on a different shift. The laughing came from outside. It started around day 8. A car had stopped on the side street, the one that should not have had a sightline into the lot, but if you were in the right position, you could see through a gap between 2 sections of construction fence. A man in the car had seen Delia come out of the porta-potty with her backpack and her blanket and her braided copper-red hair, and he had rolled down his window and said something. She did not hear exactly what. She heard the tone. That was how it started. Over the next several days, a few more people noticed. Some were just looking, workers from a business down the block who had started using the side street as a shortcut. Some stopped. Some said things. Most of the things followed the same shape, that it was disgusting, that she should not be there, that there were places for people like her. People like her. That phrase appeared in multiple variations across multiple people, which told Delia something about how she was being categorized in the minds of people who had not spent 11 minutes trying to understand her situation. She had been in college 2 years ago. She had been studying environmental science at Portland State. She had been living with 2 roommates in a house in the Woodstock neighborhood, paying rent, going to class, working part-time at a coffee shop on Division. She had a full financial aid package. She had a plan. Then her mother got sick, not in a way that resolved quickly, in a way that did not resolve at all, and then resolved in the worst direction. She left school to help. She moved back to Medford 3 hours south, and spent 8 months helping her mother and her younger brother manage the situation. She came back to Portland in September with no apartment, no job, no remaining financial aid package because she had withdrawn mid-semester, and the timing meant she owed money back, and no roommates who had held space for her because no one can hold space for 8 months. She was not addicted to anything. She was not mentally ill, or she had not been, and she was working very hard not to let what was happening to her now create something that had not existed before. She was not a statistic. She was a specific person with a specific series of events that had led to a specific gravel lot in Southeast Portland, and she was making the best decisions available to her with what she had. The people who laughed from car windows did not know any of this, but Delia had reached the point where she did not particularly need them to. What she needed was for the cold to stop, and then she needed a next step. The next step came from an unexpected direction. A woman named Carol Abram, who worked for a small nonprofit that operated a day center about half a mile from the lot, had heard about the Porta-Potty situation from a city sanitation worker who serviced the unit. The sanitation worker had been confused by the duct tape, for he had serviced the unit, removed the tape to do his job, and then taped it back approximately the way he had found it before he left, because he was not sure what was happening, but he thought it might be important. He mentioned it to Carol the next time he saw her, because Carol's organization was one of the ones that liaised with the city on sanitation access for people without housing. Carol came to the lot on a Wednesday afternoon. She introduced herself at the gate. She asked if she could come in. Delia said yes. Carol looked at everything without commenting while she looked at it. The taped seams, the carpet squares, the tote inverted into footrest, the mylar on Tess's door, the cardboard wall panel. She asked questions the way someone asks questions when they are actually trying to understand something, not when they are building to a point they have already decided to make. Or she asked how long they had been there. She asked about the temperature differential. She asked whether anyone had gotten sick. She asked who had figured out the seaming method. Delia answered everything. She was not worried about Carol. Carol had arrived on foot, introduced herself with her full name and organization name, and had not once looked at the porta-potties with the expression that most people used. The one that said what she was looking at confirmed something she had already believed about the people using it. Carol said, "The tape system is genuinely interesting." She meant the seam sealing. She had worked in emergency housing for 11 years, and she said she had not seen a field solution to the vapor path problem that worked this well with materials that were this accessible. She also said she had to be honest. The lot was technically accessible because the construction project had stalled and nobody was actively managing it, but that could change. She had no way to guarantee the timeline. And the units themselves, the sanitation schedule, the service access, were tied to a contract she did not control. Delia already knew this. She had been tracking the lot situation since the first week, watching for any sign of the project resuming, looking for any contact information on the fencing, checking the city permit board online at the library. The permit status had not changed in 4 weeks, which meant the project was stalled at a level above the contractor. That could mean months. It could mean it resolved tomorrow. Carol said she had a proposal. She said she could not solve the housing situation. Her organization did not have housing. They had a day center and limited connections to placement programs with long wait lists. But she had a relationship with a warehouse owner in the Central East Side who had been quietly allowing 2 people to sleep in a storage area in exchange for some basic maintenance work, and that arrangement had just opened up because one of the 2 people had gotten into a subsidized housing placement. She was looking for one person. She could not take 4. Delia said she understood. She said Tess should go. Tess had the job. Tess had the closest thing to a stable next step of any of them. Having a stable sleep address, even an informal one, would make it possible to build on what she was already doing. Tess did not agree immediately. She sat on the gravel for a while. Then she said okay. She asked Carol to explain what the maintenance expectation was. Specifically, Carol explained, light sweeping, checking that the roll-up door was secured at night, basic reporting if anything looked wrong. 3 hours a week at most. Tess said that worked with her schedule. They left that day. Delia watched them walk out through the gate together. She went back inside her porta-potty and sat on the inverted tote with the door latched. Here's what the people who had laughed from the side street could not have seen, because they had not been paying the right kind of attention. Delia had a list. Not on paper. She had not wasted paper on this. In her head. A running order of what she had figured out and what she still needed to figure out. She had figured out the ceiling. She had figured out the insulation sequencing. She had figured out the most efficient use of a small interior space for warmth, how to use the inverted tote, how to position her body relative to the walls, how to use the blanket as a second door rather than a bed covering. She had figured out sight lines, entry timing, how to move in and out without creating a pattern that people could track. She had figured out how to use the library not just for charging an internet, but as a staging area, arriving early, leaving late, managing her appearance so that the amount of friction she encountered in public stayed manageable. What she had not figured out yet was the next place she had been working on this. She had found, 3 weeks into the Porta-Potty, that her thinking was clearer than it had been when she was sleeping under the loading dock. Not because the Porta-Potty was comfortable. It was not. But because she was not spending any cognitive space on whether she would be warm tonight. That problem was solved. Solved with tape and garbage bags and a carpet remnant and a 67-cent blanket hook. But solved. When you stop spending energy on a solved problem, you get the energy back. She had used that energy to look at the next problem properly. The next problem was not a permanent apartment. That was too many steps ahead. The next problem was a mailing address, which was the access barrier standing between her and 3 things. A state ID renewal, a bank account, and the ability to re-enroll at PSU for the spring semester through a re-entry program she had found while on one of the library computers. She could not get a mailing address at the shelter because she was not a current resident of the shelter. She could not get the state ID without the mailing address. The bank would not open an account without the ID, and the university needed both the ID and the bank account information to release financial aid even under the reentry hardship provision. Everything locked into everything else. That was the access barrier. Not any one thing, but the sequence of dependencies that made each thing impossible without the prior thing, and made the prior thing impossible without something else. Carol knew about this problem. She had called Delia's phone, the cracked Android, the day after Tess left, and they had talked for 22 minutes about it. Carol's organization offered a mailing address service. It was basic. Mail came to the organization's address, they held it, clients picked it up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There was a 3-week wait list for the mailing address service because more people needed it than the organization had capacity to manage. Carol put Delia on the list that afternoon. While she waited, she kept working on the space, not because she expected to be in the lot indefinitely, because she needed something to do with her hands while her brain worked on the larger problem. And improving the space had outcomes she could see and measure. The back wall had been the coldest surface consistently. She had been using the double-layered garbage bags, but she needed something denser. She found, along a stretch of street being cleared after a cleanup day, a section of foam pipe insulation, the gray tube kind, split along one side, meant to slide around water pipes she had, 3 pieces, each about 18 inches long. She cut them open flat and taped them to the back wall in a vertical strip pattern, overlapping the edges covering roughly half the back wall surface. The difference that night was significant enough that she woke up twice thinking she had overheated, which had not been a concern she had ever expected to have in November in an unheated fiberglass box. She added it to the list in her head. Foam pipe insulation, back wall, net positive on thermal retention. She also dealt with the condensation problem during this period. In a small sealed space with a human body, moisture builds up. It collects on the cold walls and then releases as the temperature drops in early morning. She had been waking up with damp on the walls and on the edges of the blanket near the wall contact points. She dealt with it by pressing a folded paper towel along the wall-to-floor seam each night. She got paper towels from the library bathroom, 2 at a time, which absorbed the worst of the drip before it reached the floor. She replaced it each morning. It was not an elegant solution. It worked. Marcus, who was 2 units over, had a different condensation problem because he had not sealed the door gap as thoroughly and had more cold air exchange, which meant less moisture buildup but lower interior temperature. They talked about it one evening. He did not want to change his approach. He found the slightly cooler and drier interior easier to sleep in than the warmer and slightly more humid one, which was a reasonable preference. People have different tolerance ratios for temperature versus moisture. Joe had sealed everything and added the mylar Tess had left behind and was, by her own assessment, the warmest of any of them. Joe was also the lightest sleeper and the most noise-aware, and she had identified a timing pattern in the lot. A security vehicle did a slow pass on the side street at approximately 11:40 p.m. on weeknights. Not every night, but enough nights that it was worth knowing. She passed this to Delia. Delia adjusted her entry time. This was the thing that the people laughing from car windows had categorized as disgusting, and had not looked at long enough to see. 4 people had built a functioning small system. It had thermal insulation, condensation management, access control, and collective information sharing. It had developed organically over about 3 weeks. It was not permanent. It was not good. It was a response to a specific set of conditions with a specific set of materials, and it worked better than most of what had been available to any of them before it. The mailing address came through on a Thursday, 5 weeks after Delia had first taped the door gap. Carol called at 9:14 a.m. Delia was at the library. She went immediately to the DMV on Northeast Oregon Street and began the state ID process. There was a form involved that required 2 forms of identification. She had a birth certificate. It had been in her backpack the entire time, in a waterproof document sleeve her mother had made her buy years ago, saying you never know when you need to prove you exist. She had her old student ID from PSU, which was expired but still readable. The DMV accepted both with the mailing address documentation from Carol's organization. The ID took 12 business days. While she waited, she completed the pre-application for the re-entry program at PSU. It was online and did not require the ID yet. That came later in the process. It required an explanation of her withdrawal circumstances and her current situation. She wrote it at the library in one sitting. She wrote it plainly without minimizing what had happened and without making it something other than what it was. She named her mother. She named the dates. She named what she was doing now. She did not name the Porta-Potty specifically, but she described the situation as sleeping in an improvised shelter while managing the process of re-enrollment, which was accurate. The ID arrived at Carol's organization address on a Monday. Delia picked it up on Tuesday. She went directly from the organization to a credit union 3 blocks away that had a basic checking account with no minimum balance requirement and no monthly fee. She opened the account with the ID and $12 she had gotten from returning bottles over the previous 2 weeks. The account took 4 business days to activate. She submitted the financial aid re-enrollment application on a Thursday evening at the library, 22 minutes before closing. She walked back to the lot in the dark. It was cold, colder than it had been in 2 weeks, the temperature dropping back into the low 20s after a milder stretch. She could see her breath. She stopped at the gate and looked at the lot for a moment before going in. She had been in this lot for 44 days. She went inside her unit and latched the door and sat on the inverted tote in the dark with her hands in her jacket pockets. The foam pipe insulation on the back wall held the warmth in a way she had still not entirely gotten used to. Through the mylar on the door, she had found a second emergency blanket at the free store near the day center and added it to her own door. 2 weeks after Tess had left, threw the heat back across the interior in a way she could feel on her face. She thought about her mother. She thought about the gap between her front teeth. She thought about the car that had stopped on the side street and the voice from the open window. She thought about the tape, the roll of duct tape she had bought at a 7-Eleven on her 3rd day outside because she had been carrying things in bags that kept tearing and she needed something to fix that. She had not bought it to seal a porta-potty. She had bought it to keep her bags together. The solution had come from looking at what she had and asking a different question. Not what is wrong with this place, what does this place have that I can use? 4 walls. A roof, a door that latched from inside. Everything else was tape. The financial aid decision came back 6 days later, approved under the re-entry hardship provision. Their spring semester enrollment confirmation to follow. Delia received it in an email she read on the library computer, standing up because she had arrived late and there were no open seats. She sat down on the floor next to the computer bank and read it twice. A man who worked at the library, someone she had seen every time she came in for 2 months, walked past and stopped and asked if she was all right. She said yes. She said she had just gotten some good news. He nodded and kept walking. He did not ask what the news was. She appreciated that. She left the library and walked the 6 blocks back to the lot in the early dark. She stopped at the mini-mart on the corner and bought a cup of coffee with the coins in her jacket pocket. She stood outside the mini-mart and drank it and looked at the street. The lot was where it had always been. The gate was where it had always been. The porta-potties were in the back corner, 2 of them now, the 3rd still sitting where it had started, her copper-red braid visible in the gap under the door where the carpet had settled again. Her K-car slowed on the side street. She watched it. It stopped for a few seconds. She could see someone in the passenger seat looking toward the lot. She finished her coffee. She walked to the gate and opened it and went in. She did not look back at the car. 44 days ago, she had made what she had called the wrong move. She had stood at that gate and known exactly what the porta-potty was, and told herself she would not do that. Not that, but here was the thing she had not known standing at the gate. The wrong move, done the right way, had bought her the time she needed. The wrong move had given her 4 walls and a roof and a door that latched from inside. And from inside that door, she had thought more clearly than she had in months. And from that clarity, she had worked backward through the sequence of locked doors, the mailing address, the ID, the bank account, the application, and had gone through each one in order. She had not solved homelessness. She had not solved anything large. She was 23 years old, and she had solved the next 90 days. That was not nothing. She had also, without meaning to, shown Tess a way through, that had gotten Tess to the warehouse address, which had gotten Tess stable enough that she was now reliably making her shelter intake cutoff on the nights she did not go to the warehouse. She had sat in the gravel and explained the tape to Joe, who had extended it to the Mylar, which had extended it back to Delia, where she and Marcus had talked through condensation management at a level of detail that nobody outside that lot would have understood or recognized as the kind of problem-solving it was. 4 people had come into a lot separately and had, without anyone organizing them or funding them or writing a program around them, built something that worked. Not because they were remarkable, because they were cold and they were paying attention and they had enough between them to share. That was the system. That was what it added up to. She went into her unit and latched the door and lay down with the Mylar throwing warmth across her face. And she set an alarm for 7 a.m. because the re-enrollment confirmation required her to call an advising office between 8 and 10, and she slept without waking up once until the alarm went off.